Hi, my name is Crystal Shawanda. I am a singer, songwriter, producer, and CEO of New Sun Music, and you are listening to Talking Blues.
So, where am I talking to you at? Where are you at right now?
I am at home in Nashville, Tennessee.
Why Nashville? I know you've been living there for a while, but tell me about being in Nashville and how important that is to you.
Well, I started taking trips to Nashville, Tennessee when I was 12 years old with my dad, who was a truck driver at the time. And I just grew up on stories of, Nashville, Music City, and home of country music and home of the Grand Ole Opry. And it's where the best of the best flock to and the best of the best can thrive there. So as soon as I could, I came and I just fell in love with it. It's music all day long, 24/7, 7 days a week. And I just felt like this was a place that I could exist in. And because I'm so obsessed with music. And so whether you want to go to songwriting clubs or go watch live music, or then there's the history of Music Row, and that's where all the songwriters would gather and write songs. And that's where all the publishers and record labels and managers and agents were. And I just, as soon as I got here, I started learning the history of music here in Nashville. And I learned from a lot of different mentors. And I have a great love for this city. And once I got here, I thrive here. I work here constantly, not just as a singer, but also as a songwriter and also as a producer. We're always working. And so all the musicians who we use in our sessions are right here in Nashville. And it's where I make sense the most. So I just have never left. I just feel very much at home here. But I'm fortunate with a career that allows me to tour back home in Canada constantly. So I have the best of both worlds in my life right now.
If I understand correctly, you didn't start off in music. Did you not start off in theater?
I did. I did. Well, I started off in both. I was always singing. My mom said, I started singing before I could talk, and I jumped on stage when I was 6 years old, and I started getting paid to do when I was 10. But so I would sing at local events like variety shows and jamborees and talent nights, stuff like that, telethons. And I was at one of those performances where a director at our local theater company called Ojibwe Theater, his name was Larry Lewis, and he actually approached my mom and he said, "Have you ever thought about putting your daughter into acting?" And my mom said, "No, not really." And he said, "Well, you should." He said, "Because whatever it is, she has it. So please go get her headshots and bring her over to the theater, and I will have her working in no time." And I was so excited. And that's exactly what we did. We got my headshots and took them to the theater, and they immediately put me in two productions, one of which went on like a lot of extensive tours in the summer, because we were kids, so we only toured in the summer. But I learned a lot. That was my first. I guess I was 10 and 11 years old when I was doing that, but that was my first experience with going on tour on the road.
Was that musical theater or was it acting theater?
No, it was straight up acting theater. So it was really, I learned a lot. It was a lot of fun. But I also figured out, at some point I had to make that choice because theater and acting, it's so demanding, schedule wise. When you sign up for something, you have to be there at all times. And a lot of times I had a lot of offers for shows coming in that I had to say no to because I had to be there for rehearsals and then for the tours themselves. So I just, for me, I felt like music was my first love. So I made the mature decision of dropping the acting and pursuing the music full time.
At a very, very young age.
Yeah, for sure.
So where does that love of music come from?
It was a gift from my family. I grew up in a home where everybody was a big fan of music, and they didn't listen to just one style of music. They listened to all genres, and in our house there was just good music and bad music. And my family had very high standards considering that they weren't professional musicians, as far as vocal abilities and that's a musicianship. They had very good taste. And so my parents, they listened to old country music like Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Loretta Lynn, then my oldest brother would listen to blues music like Muddy Waters and BB King, Etta James, but he also listened to Prince and Tom Petty. And then my other brother, he listened to Dwight Yoakam and Steve Earle, but he also listened to AC/DC and Black Sabbath. So, I had this very eclectic upbringing when it came to music, and everyone was always listening to music and always singing along to it. And at a young age, I could recognize that it was more than just music to listen to. To them, it was like a lifeline. It was like I learned from my family that music could be like cheap therapy, depending on the day they were having. That would dictate what songs and what albums and what singers they were listening to. And I would watch them, be having something a lot on their mind that they're not talking about. And then they'd put on this music, and next thing you know, they're singing along at the top of their lungs, and their whole demeanor would change. And that was when I first realized that music heals. And so that's how I started. I just wanted to sing so I could help people through their tough times.
And when did you know that you had some musical talent?
It was very early on. I credit my mom for recognizing that. Like, she would tell me, lots of people could sing, a lot of people can sing, but I can tell that you feel it when you're singing it. And that's the difference. And she would also say that I've never heard you sing a bad note or sing out of tune or get out of time. That's natural talent. Those are natural gifts, and she would tell me your instincts on the choices you make as far as your vocals. She would tell me that can't be taught. People can take vocal lessons, but they can't be taught the instincts as far as what would sound the best or feel the best in this moment to everybody. So she was the one who pointed that out to me. And even my songwriting, she would hear me singing a song while I'm playing, and she would say, "Where did that song come from?" And I would tell her, I don't know. I guess I made it up." And then she would get a paper and a pencil, and she would write down what I was singing. And she'd be like, "Look, you wrote a song." And then I would always write poetry in school. I got really into poems and writing and short stories. And she would tell me, "You could turn your stories and your poems into songs." And she would write down the lyrics of other songs that we were listening to. And she would show me, "See, this is called a verse, and this is a chorus, and then this is a verse. Then you do the chorus again." So that's how you write a song. And my mom was not a songwriter, but she just, studied it and common sense put it together and explained it to me in a way I could understand. And so I started writing songs when I was about 8 years old. So it just, my mom was the one who always just told me, you were given a gift from the creator, and you need to treat it as such. You need to embrace it, protect it, nurture it. And that's how you say thank you for it.
When you are told that at such a young age, did you ever question it?
No, I never did, because I felt it, and there was always breadcrumbs, watching movies and hearing stories of other people of, chasing their dreams. I paid attention how people did it, and it didn't have to be music, but I could get the sense of, when you are given something. And, my mom always explained to me, as an Indigenous person, you will be the first in a lot of spaces. And so you need to carry yourself in a good way. And sometimes people say, "Wow, that's a lot to put on a kid too." But again, growing up as an Indigenous person, we are given 7 teachings, and some of those teachings are respect and honor, and to be humble. And so it's just a natural way of living, a natural way of thinking. It's not something I need to apply. It's just who I am.
But was it easy? Let's say when you went to Nashville at the age of 14, and I don't know what it was like to be an Indigenous person going down at a young age like that, but what was that like?
Well, I was so excited. I was too excited and naive to be scared. And I was always the different one, because I started singing and singing contests around Ontario and Canada at a very young age. So I was always the darkest one in the bunch, and I noticed it. And so I was kind of used to being the odd one. And so after a while, I just embraced that role. And so when I came to Nashville, I just like, yeah, this is, in a way, it kind of made me stand out. It made me unique, and people remembered me for sure because there wasn't anybody that looked like me. And so I kind of just rode that, and embraced it. And but at times it was scary, and at times it was isolating. Like sometimes I felt like an alien. Like I went through a lot of culture shock, leaving home at such a young age, and you know, our sense of humor as Indigenous people, we have a certain sense of humor where everything we can make anything funny, and and sometimes people think you're weird when you laugh at everything and anything. So but I again, I grew up as a misfit and kind of an outsider, so I was used to it. So I just I was like a duck. I just let it roll off my back. When I felt out of place, I'd be like, okay, well, that's not the place for me. And I just keep on going.
Is it correct that you started busking at a very young age?
Yes, I moved to Nashville the first time when I was 16 years old. And when I got to Nashville, I had this plan of like, I'm moving there to be a singer. And, so I could go and perform at songwriting clubs where people get up and just sing their songs that they wrote. But when I wanted to go and sing at the clubs like down on Broadway, I didn't think about it like that. You can't until you're 21. So I was like, well, there goes that plan. So the way I would do it is I would go downtown, and I would, during the afternoon, before 6 o'clock, people underage could get in. So I would walk up and down Broadway and ask, hey, could I get up to sing? And I'll pass your tip jug if you let me up. And they say, okay, come on up. And I would give them a break, and I'd pass their tip jug, get them some money. And I always got up and did some big vocal songs, so I'd always get them a lot of tips. So it got to the point where they looked forward to seeing me coming along. And they'd be like, hey, Crystal, get up here and pass the tip jug, sing and pass the tip jug. And then after I would do that, I would go to the street corner down in front of Gibson Guitars, what used to be down on Broadway, and I would set up my guitar case, and I'd pull out my guitar, and I would sing for a few hours. And I try to sing, like, especially if there was like a hockey game going on or a concert going on, then there would be a lot of foot traffic, and that's when I would usually do the best. And so, yeah, 16 years old, I started busking in Nashville.
I would imagine you were pretty confident with yourself and your musical abilities. Is that correct?
Yeah, I knew that I had something. I knew that I was capable and that I was competent when it came to music. And like my mom said, I knew that I never hit a bad note. And so I just kind of wrote on that. But I also recognized the fact that I was very different than what was on Broadway at the time. It was kind of a uniform look as far as the chick singers who were on Broadway. And sometimes I think sometimes people didn't respond to me because I was so different. I think sometimes people were, more like trying to figure out, what is she? So like people were like, are you Hawaiian? Are you Brazilian? Are you Mexican? And so I had a lot of different, guesses. And so, but it was one of those things, but it was scary, but I learned a lot through it. And the more I did it, the more confident I got. But there's definitely those times where sometimes people would walk by and they would look at me strange, and then they just keep walking. And that would start like, in my head, I would almost start sweating, and I'd feel my face get really hot. I'm like, they don't like me, or they don't like the way I look, or, I start beating myself up in my mind. And then I would just like, stop it. We have to do this. So just stop thinking like that. And I would just push it out of my mind. And then I would just sing one of my favorite songs and forget about it.
What do you think is the greatest thing you learned from that experience of busking?
Oh, I think the greatest thing that I learned was resilience, and to just never give up. And most importantly, not everybody's going to like you. And that's okay, because in a few minutes, some other people are going to walk along and they're going to like you and they're going to get you. And so I've learned that through life, with releasing music and, and going out there and playing shows, is that, if somebody doesn't like you, those aren't your people. And that's okay. Just keep going. You'll find your people.
But not too long after, you got a record deal at a pretty young age. So that must have been a nice way of recognizing what you do.
Yes, definitely. I went back and forth. I did move back to my community because I would go up and down Music Row and I would go knocking on doors I had no right to be knocking on. And, I'd go knock and I'd go to the receptionist. I'd be like, hey, I'm Crystal Shawanda. And I'm from Canada. I'm a country music singer. And, they tell me, well, get your manager to book an appointment. And I'd be like, well, I don't have a manager. How do I get one of those? And one of those days, I got lucky where a guy was going into the back hallway and he stopped and he said, hey, you know what? I got a few minutes. Come on in and play me a couple songs. And he introduced himself, and I couldn't believe it because he ended up being like a producer on some of my favorite albums.
Wow.
And he was a big executive at a record label. And we went in and sat down, and I played a couple songs for him. And he was like, wow, that was amazing. But I wouldn't know what to do with you. Native Americans within country music doesn't really make sense. And I wouldn't even know how to market you. And I don't think the country music fans are ready for someone like you. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thanked him for his time and I walked out the door and I tried not to cry. And then I kept doing my routine, every day. And then after 2 months, I'm like, well, I might as well go home, because what am I doing here? I'm wasting my time if somebody like me can't get through the door. And I went back home and I went down a self-destructive spiral. And but after a while, I realized, you know what? I'm going to go back to Nashville because screw that guy. and, and it's like, and this time when I went back to Nashville, it wasn't for a record deal. It was because I was born to sing and I'm not good at anything else. So I got to do this. I got to make it work. And so I went back to Nashville and I just started working really hard. I got a steady gig at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, a club down on Broadway. I started playing with my husband in a band, Dwayne Strobel, and and this buzz built up. Next thing you know, famous songwriters were coming to listen to me, producers, publishers, record labels, and other artists were sneaking in and they would come and sit in the back room and listen to us. And it was very exciting. And there was, I got signed to a publishing deal first as a songwriter. And then I got signed to a production deal with Scott Hendricks Productions. And then I signed with RCA Records and there was a bidding war. And it was one of the most talked about things in Nashville at that moment in time. And I couldn't believe it, to go from, you're not being even an option, which felt like having my life dream taken away from me, to being at the top. And it was exciting and it was a beautiful blur in my life. And I learned so much from it. And I'm very grateful that, I can look back at that and I can say, wow, I did that.
I mean, the fact that you went back and thought, oh, what am I doing this for? But the moment that you said, well, this is what I do, that realization and to go back, that's a pretty ballsy thing to do.
It is. It was. A lot of people, said, why are you going back? But then I had all these other people who were like, you need to go back again. When I was trying to kill my dream and trying to give up, I had a lot of community members in my hometown and my family telling me, go try again. You have something we don't have. You have this golden ticket. Why aren't you using it? The ticket never goes away. You'll always have that talent. And, and that's what I learned is that in the industry, people will come and go. And, but that talent, that stays with me.
When things started looking up and people were very interested in you and there was different record companies bidding for you. I mean, how did you feel about that?
It was incredible. It was unbelievable and surreal. I couldn't, these doors that wouldn't even look at me twice were now wide open for me. And I took advantage. I embraced the opportunity. I showed up every day with a notebook, writing notes, and I paid attention to my mentors, maybe a little too much, because along the way, I kind of lost my own voice and my own point of view, because I was so grateful for these opportunities that were given to me that I wanted to make everybody proud of me, so much so that I lost who I was in the process of trying to be everything everyone wanted me to be. And so that was something that I learned along the way. And, as exciting as those opportunities are, you have to remember to hold on to your own spirit.
But at the same time, I mean, you had success immediately after. So when people are telling you to do this and do that, which might have not felt like who you were, it was also showing some results.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's, that's what I took with me when we parted ways. When I parted ways with my manager or with my record company at the time, is I took all those lessons with me. And everything that I learned from them, I apply it in the way that I carry myself, the way we write and produce music, the way we package it, the way I present myself when I go out and do shows, and how I prepare. Preparing is the biggest part of everything I do, mentally preparing myself for what is the vision for this project? What do I want to get across? And, and through that, I take what they've taught me, and now I've brought back in who I am as an artist. So to me, I feel like it makes a much more authentic and more real connection. And, at the end of the day, when you're in the music business, if you have a big machine pushing you, you're going to reach more ears, you're going to reach more radio stations and more interviews and that sort of thing. And that's amazing, but the whole format is also changing as well, where things don't happen the way they used to. So as I'm growing and learning in this industry, I'm taking what I've learned, but readjusting with how things continue to evolve.
But was that difficult for you to get rid of your manager and your record company, walk away from that, and to redo things the way you wanted to redo it? Like, that was pretty risky, I would imagine.
Yes, it was absolutely terrifying. And I had countless people telling me I was committing career suicide.
Because you were doing well, right? Like, it wasn't like you
Yes.
weren't doing bad. You weren't
No,
doing
no,
well.
we did fantastic. My first single went to number one in Canada and America, and it was the fastest rising single for Canadian artists in BDS history. And I held that record for almost close to 15 years. And but
Wow.
finally, somebody finally reached did the same thing. So that's a long time to hold that record, and the ones before me held it for a few years and we came along. So I'm very proud of that, and then the first album, when we released it, it debuted at number 16 on the American country music's Billboard sales chart. So sales and then we got the Canadian Radio Music Award. So, all my success was not hype. It was radio airplay, it was album sales. And to me, that's the real stuff, that's the tangible stuff. It's like this is really happening, and we were touring everywhere, playing the Grand Ole Opry, but the format of country music began to change. It started to become more pop country and more bro country. And that's not what I grew up with. I grew up with old country music. And so now this style of music that I love so much had changed. And, I was being told in order to take up space on radio, this is what you have to become. And that's just not what I dreamed of ever since I was a kid. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I tried. I actually recorded a third country album. I sat there listening back to the songs and I was like, wow, I don't like any of these songs.
Wow.
So I just stepped back and I said, let's just play music for a while and write songs and take a pause to figure out what I want to do here. And then as I was writing songs, they kept coming out sounding like blues songs. And, and
Can you
around,
explain that? Why do you think that is?
you know, I don't know. I think because I wasn't going into a writer's room with writers and saying, okay, we got to write an up-tempo, positive song that can get us to number one on country music radio. I think instead, I was just sitting down on my couch with my guitar and just writing what I felt. Like we watched the news one day and there was like all kinds of stuff going on in the world. And I just picked up my guitar and I started writing the song called The Whole World's Got the Blues. And my husband was in the kitchen cooking and he comes in, he goes, what is that? I said, I don't know, but I like it, because it felt so natural. It felt like where it started from when music first took a hold of me, where I was writing this because I needed to. I needed this release. I was stressed and worried about things happening in the world and I needed to get it out. So this was my therapy that day, and then we just kept writing from that place. And it just felt so good to get back to that place. So because I didn't want to do the, radio up-tempo positive songs with the label I was with, I parted ways with RCA and I started my own record label called New Sun Music. And I said to my husband, I said, well, isn't this why we started a record company, so that we could do whatever we wanted? And when I started the company, it was from a selfish place of creating a space where I could experiment, explore, and figure out who I really am and what I really wanted to say with my voice. And that's when I released my first blues album, and it was like letting a bird out of a cage. Like, I wasn't trying to fit me in a little box anymore. Now I could just be everything I am, and I just never looked back.
I wonder how your audience, the people that came to love you with your first album, your first couple albums, how they reacted to this shift.
It was very difficult because a lot of them felt like I was betraying them, and like I didn't appreciate them, and like all of a sudden I hated country music. But it wasn't the case. I still love country music today. I still listen to it. I prefer older country music. That's just what I'm drawn to. And and so I would get a lot of messages from fans who were like, well, just so you know, now that you're doing blues music, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. And I threw all my old albums away, and I'm not coming to your shows anymore. And I'd be like, okay, thanks for telling me. But at the end of the day, I'm just like everybody else. I'm trying to figure out who I am. Where do I make sense? Where do I fit in? What feels right to me? And I'm just trying to build a life that I want, a life where I'm truly happy and content, and where I'm at peace, and where, when I wake up every day, I'm excited about the life I'm living. And when I go to bed, I can sleep so soundly because I know I've made choices that have made me truly happy. Because there's the idea of happiness, and then there's truly being happy. There's the idea of success, and then there's really being successful. And I think really being successful is when you build a life that you want, that makes you happy on your own terms.
I'm in such a gutsy mood. How did you get the blues audience to like you? How did that happen? I mean, did that come easily?
It did not come easily. I had to really work really hard, and I had to earn it. And rightfully so, because a genre of music like blues music, it should be protected and it should be respected. And of course, people have, like, why are you coming over your life? That was the biggest response, was like, go back to country music. You don't know nothing about blues music. But really, at the end of the day, nobody knows what I know about. I've been a fan of music since I was a kid. So at some point, when I decided that I wanted to be a great vocalist, I studied all styles of music. I studied blues, country, rock and roll. I studied classical music. I used to do musicals when I was in high school and college. And I took classical voice to become an opera singer. I love learning to sing in other languages. I've learned to sing in French and German. And these are things that Italian, I've challenged myself to do because I want to be great at what I do. And I take the best of what I like, what I appreciate about a style of music, and then I apply it to what I do. And then the stuff that I don't like, I leave that behind. But, and so that's kind of what led me to what I'm doing, but my first few blues albums, I tried to, record some covers of some of my favorite blues songs. And I was trying to share with the blues community, these are songs and these are singers that led me to blues music, that made me love blues music. And so I think I spent those first few albums trying to prove how blues I could actually be. And then after I did that, and it seemed like people were coming around and at least hearing me out, then after that, that's when I got comfortable in my own skin and just started being who I truly am, a product of all these different genres.
I just wonder, when you're successful in the country field and decide that I'm going to change to blues, the country field people are saying, I don't really like you because I like country. And then the blues people are saying, you're not really blues. At what point do you feel your own confidence that this was the right move to do? And how do you keep positive when you have these two forces against you?
Well, what I did was I called my mom a lot. And I called her every time I was frustrated and sad, and and that's what I've done my whole life though. Like I said, I'm used to being an outsider and a misfit and an underdog, and I've it's a heavy burden to bear, but I've gotten used to it, and it's given me very thick skin through it. So for me, I knew I was following my heart, and that's always the most important thing to me. So when people were hating on what I was doing, I would confide in my husband, like, I hope this all leads to something, because I just know in my heart this is what I'm supposed to do. So I now, looking back, I'm so glad that I stuck it out, and when I struggled, that's what I did, was I would call my mom and confide in her, and I would cry to her. I cried a lot, and there was not many people who could understand what I was going through besides my husband and my mom and dad. And they would give me advice as best they could, considering they weren't really sure what I was dealing with.
Or
And
even your husband?
yeah, what my husband did though, my husband, he's never stopped believing through it all. He has, I don't know if you ever watch Lord of the Rings, but he has always been my Sam Wise. He carries me when I feel like I can't go anymore. He'll pick me up and he'll say, "We got to keep going. You got this." I just know it. I just know it. He never ever faltered for a second with his faith in me and what I'm capable of and what I could do and what I should do. And so I'm so grateful for that, because I know I'm lucky to have that. And and he always lets me know, it's you're doing this, And so I've been lucky in that way. But it's, and then sometimes I would call my parents, and my mom would tell me, do what you always do, write a song about it, and then you'll find other people who feel the same way as you. And so I wrote a song called Fish Out of Water, that's about that feeling of not fitting in. And so that was the title track of my second blues album. So it comes out in the music as well, and that's, again, music becomes my therapy.
Can you tell me, was there a moment where you thought, okay, I did make the right decision?
Yes, every time I step on stage and I get to sing these amazing blues songs that it feels so good to sing. Every time I get in the studio and I get to sing these songs where I'm no longer holding back, I don't even have to think about it. Like, we're already working on a new album, and I just did the vocals on one of our new songs the other day, and I walked in the studio and I sang that song in one take, and my husband's like, "That's it." I'm like, "It can't be it." He's like, "It is." He's like, "I'm telling you, that's the take. You could do it a bunch more times, but that's a take." And I think I'm getting into a place where now I know who I am as an artist. And so when I get on stage or I get in the studio, what's coming out is who I'm meant to be now, because I'm not trying to fit in. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm just being myself, and it feels really good.
I know that this is not your first Juno nomination, definitely not your first award. But what does the recent Juno nomination mean to you?
Oh, it's everything. It's encouraging, is what it is. It makes me feel like, well, the past couple years we've been kind of struggling, to be honest, because my longtime agent and manager Rob Patty passed away, and I was with him for 14 years. We paired up with him right after I split from my Nashville team, and so 14 years in the music business, that's a lifetime.
Sure.
So at times I felt rudderless in the water. We felt rudderless in the water, and we felt alone. But with this nomination, it really makes me feel like we're not alone, because with the release of this album, we had so many mentors in the blues music community who gave us advice, who helped us and gave us direction and guidance, who've been there for us while we've been figuring out our next move. And so now to get this nomination, it makes me feel like I have the respect of my, fellow music industry people, and they're allowing me this little space, and I'm so grateful for it. And I don't even care if I win or lose at this point. I feel like this solidifies my path that I've been forging of, my own style, my own sound, and I'm being allowed to have this space, and it feels incredible.
How do you go on when your trusted manager and agent is no longer with you?
Oh, it was so difficult. I think our biggest focus was we just can't stop. And so again, it came down to following our hearts. We kind of did a little speed dating with some different agents, and we figured out what doesn't work for us and what does work for us, because I am a unique situation. I am a blues artist, definitely. But sometimes I still get love from the country music world who will invite me to festivals and stuff like that. And then I'm also an indigenous artist. So that's a completely different market that needs to be served. So people that I work with, they have to familiarize themselves with all three of those worlds. And that's a lot to take on. So, for us, we've just tried to lean on each other, me and my husband, Dwayne, and be there for each other and reach out to people when we need help or when we don't know what to do, people that we've come to trust in the blues community. And they've been kind enough to help us out. We've had some really incredible people who keep checking in on us, and it's because of them that I'm still here, that I'm still hanging in there.
Can you talk a little bit about the indigenous audience that you talked about? I mean, you said it's a completely different group, and I would imagine it would be, but what do they represent to you and what do they give you?
Well, there's the indigenous music scene, and then there's the indigenous communities that we perform at. When I try to create a personal relationship with the indigenous communities that I perform at. When they reach out to contact me, they sometimes we'll get communities who will be like, "Well, we called your agent and they just kind of gave us the runaround, but we really want to hire you for our community event." And then that's when I give them Dwayne's phone number and I say, "Okay, my husband's going to handle this so we can handle it with a personal touch." And so that's how we do things because they're not used to doing big festivals or dealing with agents and negotiations. That's out of their wheelhouse. Of course, anybody who's not in the music industry is not going to be used to doing that. So my husband makes it very easy for them because we appreciate their support. Because when people didn't know, like country music didn't want me. I mean, country music is like mad that I'm leaving and the blues world is mad that I'm coming there. It was the indigenous community who kept calling and they were like, "We don't care what you sing, just come and sing." So, through that weird transition, they never, they knew at the end of the day I was still Crystal Shawanda.
And are there borders? Like, is there a border difference between Canada and the U.S. with indigenous audience?
Yes, definitely. I think there is a big difference. We have different I find that in Canada our indigenous communities have a lot more support from the government. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but we actually do in comparison to like in America, the indigenous communities are pretty much on their own. They don't get benefits. They don't get any. There's no special grants, and there is a couple of education grants that are available, but they're hard to get because there is still, America. The population is much larger and it's more spread out, and the communities that I guess you would say the land that these indigenous communities exist on, some of them are not the best areas of America, and when it comes to a lot of things. So there is a big difference. And I find that in America, it's not as organized as far as the indigenous music scene. It's like, in one part of America, there's an indigenous music scene. In this part of America, there's a different indigenous music scene, another part of America, and so on and so on. But in Canada, it's one unified indigenous music scene. You have the Indigenous Music Countdown. You have satellite radio and Digiverse. Then you have the Indigenous Awards. And then there's grants for indigenous artists. So I feel like it's just a little bit more organized in Canada.
Have you ever directed your music more towards the indigenous group? Like, have you ever recorded an album focused more towards that audience?
I haven't yet. When I was a kid, I did. When I was 17 years old, well, after I had that mishap with the producer who said that Native Americans couldn't exist in country music, I went home and I was like, "Hey, what do I do?" And right around that time, there was this influx in the indigenous music scene, and there was artists like Lucy Idlot and like Leela Gilday and artists like that who were coming out, and and Susan Agla-Clark, and they were doing like an indigenous music sound or whatever. And so I was like, well, I guess I got to do that. So I started writing these songs, and again, those songs were very much like therapy. And the album was called Raging Heart, and so I would say they were like contemporary indigenous music because they were basically stories of my experiences of growing up as an indigenous person through intergenerational trauma. And then some of them were like traditional stories of like storytelling of like how things came to be, the sun and the moon and stuff like that. And so, and I put that album out and it kept me, busy up in Canada. I did some shows in Ontario, and it just kept me in people's like, okay, she's still doing music kind of thing. But as I kept going, I was like, okay, now that I've done that album, it's not really what I want to keep doing. I've always wrote and performed mainstream music. Now, personally, I do cultural based music, but I don't sell it. I do that on my own. When I'm at home, I create songs on my flute, on my hand drum. But I try not to sell my culture. I That's just who I am. So that's kind of where I've always focused at. Like, I think there are so many indigenous artists out there, and each of us have a role. There are some of us like me who are doing mainstream music. There are some artists who are doing traditional based music, cultural based music, and that's important too because we need to keep our culture alive. And then we have indigenous artists who are doing contemporary indigenous music, where it's like, they're infusing their culture with contemporary sounds. And that's important too because to show that this other side of what can be done, it's the marrying of the two, right? So they're all important, and I might do an album in the future that's more indigenous music based. It is a project we've been working on, but I'm taking my time with it because I want it to be right.
You talked about reaching a point where you're very comfortable with who you are and the music that you do. Tell me when that moment, it's probably not a moment, but tell me what that feels like to reach that point where to find yourself and be very comfortable with that music that you create.
To be honest, I think I didn't get to the point till right now, my latest album, Sing Pretty Blues, because on this album, there's a lot of very blues songs, but there's also a few songs towards the end where they sound a little more country. And so I think this is the first album where I'm embracing all these parts of me, where I'm not trying to push them down anymore. I'm not trying to subdue them or hide them. I'm a product of my environment of music, and it's all coming out now and it feels really good. And I feel like we have found a way that marries the two, where old meets south, where country meets blues, where old meets new. And so I feel like I finally, I've been getting close to it the past few albums, but Sing Pretty Blues is when I have finally said, this is who I am. And oh yeah, this feels pretty good too.
And you play a Black Sabbath song.
Yes.
It's a beautiful song, by the
Thank
way.
you. Thank you. For sure. It's one of my favorites on the album.
So before we wrap up, can you tell me a little bit about the album you're working on and what direction that's going in?
Yes, the new album that we're working on, it's continuing on this path of, country meeting blues. It's blues, no doubt about it. It is blues music. But I think with this new album I'm reiterating the fact that, like for myself, I do a lot of blues in schools presentations in Canada and America, where I go and visit schools and I teach a condensed history of blues music. And when I'm talking about that, I always teach people that, a lot of people don't realize that country music was very, very heavily influenced by blues music. Hank Williams, who went on to influence all of country music, everything he learned was from an old blues man named T-Todd. So the way he sang, the way he played his guitar, the songs he wrote, the way he performed, even his charisma, all came from T-Todd, a blues man. And then everybody copied Hank Williams, So and there's other examples of that within the world. So I think with this album, I'm really, driving that home of that I am a product of those two worlds. But when you really think about it, it all stems from the same world, because blues music, was the roots and everything else is the fruits, like Willie Dixon said. And so I am, you know, I've always loved that expression when he said that. And I've always tried to carry that on. And I think that new album is going to reflect more of that. I'm really excited about it. The songs are pretty cool.
I don't know what stage you're at with the new album, but is there like a release date planned? Is there a title?
We don't have a title of the album yet. Well, we kind of do, but I'm still playing with it, so I don't want to say it yet.
Okay.
But we are about to release one of the singles on it. My team at New Sun Music, the team that I've built, has said we should just go ahead. Well, everything's going good. We should just go ahead and release a single from the upcoming album. So I'm seriously thinking about it. Very soon, we should be releasing a single.
Well, that seems to be the trend these days.
Yes, right? Yes, for sure.
Like the olden days.
Yes. We're circling back, right?
Crystal, it was a real pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck at the Junos this year.
Thank you. So great chatting with you.
Take care.